Most men hear that and nod. They think they understand it. They do not, because understanding it as a sentence requires nothing. Living it, actually descending into your own interior, facing what you find there, and bringing it back up into the light, that is the work of a lifetime. Carl Jung did not theorize this from a distance. He lived it. In 1913, at the age of 38, Jung deliberately entered what he called a confrontation with the unconscious. He let go of the intellectual structures that kept him safe. He allowed himself to descend into dreams, into visions, into the raw material of the psyche. And he stayed there for 6 years. He called it the most difficult period of his life. He also called it the source of everything that followed, everything he wrote, everything he discovered, everything that has influenced psychology, philosophy, literature, and the understanding of the human mind for the centuries since. It came from going into the dark, not avoiding it, not managing it, entering it. Today we are going to follow him in. We are going to talk about the shadow, the part of yourself you have spent your life hiding from yourself. About individuation, the process of becoming, fully and deliberately, the man you are actually meant to be. About the anima, the interior dimension that most men have cut off, and what that costs them. And about what happens to a man who does this work. Not a comfortable man, a complete one. Stay with me. This is the most important video we have made. The shadow, what you have buried, is running you. Jung called it the shadow. Not a metaphor, not a philosophical concept. A real, active, living part of your psyche. The shadow is everything you are, that you have decided or been taught is unacceptable. It is not only the dark things, it is the abandoned things, the rejected things, the parts of yourself that did not fit the version of you that the world required, the anger that was too much, the ambition that felt like arrogance, the sensitivity that felt like weakness, the hunger that felt like greed, the wildness that had no acceptable outlet, the darkness that frightened you or frightened the people around you, and so was buried. You did not destroy these things. You cannot destroy them. They are not weaknesses. They are energies, and energy cannot be destroyed. It can only be redirected. When you bury anger, it does not disappear. It comes out sideways, at the wrong people, in the wrong moments, in ways you cannot fully explain afterward and cannot seem to stop. When you bury ambition, it does not dissolve. It festers. It becomes resentment at the men who did what you were too afraid to attempt. It becomes bitterness that feels like principle. When you bury the parts of yourself that felt unacceptable, they do not go away. They go underground, and underground they grow. Jung said, "The most dangerous thing in the world is a man who does not know his shadow, because that man believes he is his persona, the mask, the performance, the carefully maintained presentation of self, and he is blind to everything that is actually driving him. He is being run. He does not know it. He calls it fate. That is the most dangerous sentence Jung ever wrote. Everything you have not made conscious will appear in your life as fate." Think about what that means. The patterns you cannot break. The relationships that keep ending the same way. The decisions you keep making that you cannot explain. The reactions that arrive before you can stop them. That is not fate. That is your shadow. Running your life while you look the other way. Meeting the shadow, what the mirror actually shows. Jung gave us a specific method for finding the shadow. It is simple, it is uncomfortable, and it works every time. Look at what you most despise in other people. Not what you mildly dislike, what you despise. The qualities in others that produce in you a reaction stronger than the situation seems to warrant. The disproportionate irritation, the visceral contempt, the anger that arrives faster than it should. Those are not judgments about other people. They are maps to your own shadow. The man who cannot tolerate arrogance in others, look more carefully at the pride he has spent his whole life suppressing because it felt dangerous to express. The man who despises weakness in others, look at the vulnerability he has never allowed himself to feel or show. The wound he has covered with competence. The man who resents successful men, look at the part of him that wanted exactly what they have and decided somewhere along the way that he did not deserve it. Your shadow is not your enemy. Your shadow is the part of you that has been waiting in the dark for the rest of you to arrive. The persona, the mask you confused with your face. Jung called it the persona. The face you show, the role you play, the version of yourself that you present to the world. The persona is not dishonest. It is necessary. We all have one. We all need one. The problem is not the persona. The problem is when you begin to confuse the mask with the face, when you forget that it is a performance and start to believe it is you. And then, when the performance is no longer required, when you are alone, when no one is watching, you feel nothing, because you have spent so long performing the self that you have lost contact with it. The invitation is to turn around, to stop looking outward at what the world needs from you, and begin looking inward at what you actually are. That turning is the beginning of individuation, and it is the most important turn a man can make. Not self-improvement, not optimization, not the accumulation of better habits or the achievement of higher goals. The process of becoming, fully, consciously, completely, the individual that you actually are. Most men never do this. Not because they lack intelligence or discipline or ambition, because individuation requires something harder than all of those things. It requires asking questions that do not have comfortable answers. What do I actually want, separate from what I was taught to want? What do I actually value, separate from what I was rewarded for valuing? What kind of man am I when no one is watching, when there is no performance required, when I have nothing to prove? And then, the hardest question of all, who shaped me? And which parts of that shaping do I actually choose to keep? Most men are assembled from the outside in, their values inherited, their ambitions borrowed, their sense of what a man should be constructed from fathers and coaches and cultures and fears. And they function, they produce, they perform. But somewhere underneath all of it, quiet, persistent, patient, there is a self that was never fully expressed, a nature that was shaped but not destroyed, a direction that was redirected but not eliminated. Jung called this the self, capital S, the totality of who a person actually is, including the unconscious parts that have never been acknowledged. Individuation is the process of aligning your lived life with your actual self, not the life you were expected to live, not the version of yourself that was acceptable to others, the life that is genuinely yours. This is not a comfortable process. It involves loss, the loss of identities you have outgrown, roles that no longer fit, versions of yourself that serve their purpose but are no longer true. It involves courage, the willingness to disappoint people who preferred the persona, to step into territory that has no map, to become someone that the man you were could not have imagined. But it is the only process that leads in the end to a life that feels like it actually belongs to you. Jung observed something that every man over 40 has felt, but most have never named. There comes a point in a man's life when the map stops working. The first half of life, Jung said, is about building, structure, career, identity, the external architecture of a functional existence. This work is real and necessary. It produces real things, but it is built largely on borrowed values, on inherited ideas about what a successful life looks like, on the approval of people whose approval you needed. And then, sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once, it stops being enough. The achievement does not satisfy the way you expected it to. The role, provider, professional, husband, expert, no longer tells you who you are. The busyness that kept the deeper questions at bay begins to feel like avoidance rather than purpose. And underneath all of it, quiet and persistent, a question arrives. Is this it? Most men panic when this happens. They call it a midlife crisis. They buy something. They change something external. They distract themselves back into motion. Because the alternative, actually sitting with the question, actually descending into it, feels like it might unmake them. Jung said, "What looks like a breakdown is often a breakthrough trying to happen." The map stopping working is not a sign that you have failed. It is a sign that you have finished the first half. And that the second half, the half that is actually about becoming who you are, rather than performing who you were supposed to be, is beginning. The men who answer this call do not become less. They become more themselves, more present, more capable of the things that actually matter. The men who avoid it, who distract and suppress and push through, arrive at the end with the persistent sense that they were never quite there, that their own life happened slightly to the side of them. Answer the call. Now we come to the concept that men most resist, and the one that resisted costs them the most. Jung called it the Anima, the interior feminine dimension of a man's psyche. Before you close the video, hear what Jung was actually saying. He was not saying men should become feminine. He was not talking about softness or submission or any modern distortion of the idea. He was saying something precise and important. Every human psyche contains the full range of human psychological capacity. And a man who has cut off half of that capacity, who has suppressed everything that does not fit a rigid idea of what a man is not stronger for it. He is more limited. The Anima, in Jungian terms, represents three things that most men have systematically suppressed. First, emotional intelligence, not sentimentality, not weakness. The genuine ability to sense what is actually happening inside another person, to read a room, to know without being told what is not being said, to be present with someone at their actual experience rather than immediately trying to solve or dismiss it. Second, intuition. The capacity to make connections that logic alone cannot make. To understand things that cannot be fully explained. To know something before you can prove it. This is not mysticism. It is a mode of cognition that has been demonstrated to be real and that analytical men systematically dismiss in themselves. Third, the creative impulse, the generative, receptive, imaginative capacity that produces everything worth producing. The ability to receive an idea before it is fully formed, to hold uncertainty long enough for something new to emerge. The man who has suppressed all of this is not harder. He is more brittle. He leads without reading the people he is leading. He loves without being able to reach the people he loves. He builds without access to the creative dimension that would make what he builds worth building. He pushes through difficulty without the intuitive sense that would tell him which difficulties are worth pushing through and which ones are signals to change direction. The Anima is not weakness. It is the other half of a man's full intelligence, and no man operates at his full capacity without it. Jung described 4 stages through which a man's relationship with his Anima develops. Understanding these stages is understanding why men relate to women, to creativity, to their own emotional life the way they do. The first stage, Eve, the Anima as pure instinct. The man at this stage is driven by biological impulse without awareness or reflection. He relates to the feminine as something to be consumed rather than known. He has no real relationship with his own interior life. The second stage, Helen, the Anima as romance and beauty. The man projects onto women an ideal that no actual woman can inhabit. He falls in love with the projection rather than the person. When the person fails to be the ideal, and she always does because she is real and the ideal is not, he is confused and disappointed. He mistakes the wound for the woman. The third stage, Mary, the Anima as wisdom and devotion. The man begins to develop genuine relationship to actual women, to actual feeling, to his own interior experience. He can be present without needing to possess. He can receive without needing to control. The fourth stage, Sophia, the Anima as pure wisdom. The man has integrated the interior feminine fully enough that it operates as a source of guidance rather than a source of compulsion. His intuition is refined. His creativity is accessible. His emotional life is not a problem to be managed, but a dimension of intelligence to be used. Most men in the modern world operate between stage 1 and stage 2. They are driven by instinct and projection without knowing it. They experience the consequences in relationships that repeat the same patterns, in creative blocks they cannot explain, in a persistent sense of disconnection from their own interior life, without being able to name the cause. The cause is a relationship with the Anima that has never been made conscious, and an interior dimension that has been suppressed so long it has turned against its owner. The man who has done this work, who has faced the shadow, stripped back the persona, walked the individuation path, and integrated the Anima, is a different kind of man. Not a softer man, a more complete one. He knows where his anger comes from, so he can choose when to use it, as protection, as drive, as the force that holds a boundary, rather than being blindly run by it. He knows what he actually values, so he cannot be easily manipulated by the things that do not serve those values. He sees the performance of wealth, the performance of success, the performance of identity, and he is not moved by it because he knows the difference between performance and substance. He can read people. Not because he has studied technique, but because he has enough interior access to recognize what is happening inside someone else. He has been in his own interior. He knows the terrain. He creates. Not because he is trying to prove something, but because the generative capacity is no longer blocked. The intuition is available. The receptivity is not seen as weakness. The imagination is not dismissed as impractical. He leads differently, not by suppressing everything that does not fit the role, but by bringing the full range of his intelligence to bear on what the situation actually requires. He loves differently, not by projecting an ideal onto the people around him and then punishing them for failing to be it, but by showing up to actual people with actual presence. He is present, not because he has achieved some enlightened state, because he is no longer spending half his energy managing what he has buried. Jung called this wholeness, not perfection, not the elimination of difficulty or darkness or struggle. Wholeness, the state in which a man has claimed all of what he is, the light and the dark, the strength and the wound, the capacity he has developed and the capacity he has abandoned, and is working with all of it rather than against half of it. That man is not comfortable. He is real, and real is rarer and more powerful than comfortable will ever be. Jung believed that the unconscious speaks, not in the language of logic, not in the language of the conscious mind, in images, in symbols, in dreams. He spent his entire career developing the practice of working with dreams, not as mysticism, not as fortune-telling, but as a rigorous method for accessing the information the unconscious is trying to communicate to the conscious mind. The dream, Jung believed, is not a random firing of neurons during sleep. It is a communication from the part of you that knows more than your conscious mind does. Think about this. Your conscious mind has access to what you have decided to pay attention to, what you have allowed yourself to know, what fits the version of yourself you have constructed. Your unconscious has access to everything else. Every piece of information your senses have registered that your conscious mind filtered out. Every pattern your nervous system has recognized that your analytical mind has not yet articulated. Every truth about yourself that your persona cannot afford to acknowledge. And every night, while you sleep, the unconscious uses the language it has, images, symbols, stories, to try to tell you what you need to know. Most men dismiss their dreams entirely. This is not rationalism. This is avoidance wearing the clothes of rationalism. You do not have to become a Jungian analyst to work with dreams. You have to begin paying attention. Write down what you dream. Not to analyze it immediately, but to begin building a relationship with the part of you that is trying to communicate. Notice what images recur, what figures appear, what feelings remain when the dream ends. Jung said, "The dream is the small hidden door in the deepest and most intimate sanctum of the soul. Most men have never opened it. They are conducting their entire life from the hallway. I want to be honest with you about what this work actually requires. It is not a weekend seminar. It is not a book you read and feel changed by. It is not the consumption of ideas like this one, however useful that consumption might be as a beginning. The work Jung described is a lifelong practice of self-confrontation. It requires solitude, actual, sustained, uncomfortable solitude. Not the solitude of scrolling alone in a room, but the kind where you sit with yourself long enough for what is underneath to begin to surface. It requires honesty, not the performed self-awareness of a man who has learned the right language, but the raw honesty of looking at your actual patterns, your actual reactions, your actual history, and asking, what is this telling me about what I have buried? It requires courage, the courage to see things about yourself that you would prefer not to see. To hold what you find without immediately needing to fix it, or justify it, or explain it away. It requires patience, because this work does not produce results on a timeline that feels satisfying. The unconscious does not respond to urgency. It responds to sustained, honest attention. Months of it, years of it. And it requires, perhaps above all, the willingness to be wrong about yourself. To discover that the version of yourself you have been defending is not as accurate as you believed. That the story you have been telling about who you are, the hero, the victim, the provider, the achiever, the man who does not need anyone, is a story, not a fact, and that the actual you, the one underneath the story, is both more and less than the character you have been playing, more complex, more wounded, more capable, more interesting, more yours. This is the work. It is not glamorous. It is not fast. It is not comfortable. But it is the only work that changes the thing that needs changing. Not your circumstances, your consciousness. Jung lived to 85. He spent the last years of his life at his stone tower on the lake at Bollingen, a place he built with his own hands, without electricity, without telephone, without the noise of the modern world. He went there to think, to dream, to be alone, with the interior life he had spent 80 years building. People who visited him in those final years said he had a quality that was difficult to describe. A presence, a completeness, the sense of a man who was entirely, unhurriedly, deeply himself. Not a performance, not a role. Himself. He had done the work. He had descended into the dark and come back with what was there. He had faced the shadow and integrated it. He had stripped the persona and found what was underneath. He had walked the individuation path, not to its end, because it has no end, but far enough to know what he was walking toward. Most men spend their lives avoiding this work. They are very good at the avoidance. They stay busy. They achieve. They perform. They accumulate. And they arrive, at the end, with the persistent sense that they were never quite there. That their own life happened slightly to the side of them. That the real thing, whatever it was somewhere they never quite reached. The man who does this work does not arrive at ease. He arrives at himself. He knows his darkness and chooses his direction anyway. He knows his wounds and is not controlled by them. He knows his shadow and has stopped letting it run him. He has stripped the persona and found something underneath that is worth being. He has walked toward the self, the actual, full, complex, unrepeatable individual that was always there, and has given it, finally, permission to be. There is nothing more powerful in the world than a man who has done that. Not a perfect man, not a comfortable man. A whole one? Stay cold, keep building, and go into the dark. That is where the real work is.